What's going on, guys? So in this video I'm going to explain how variables are stored during function calls in something called the stack. So this is important to understand if you are going to understand recursion, and our book does a very poor job of explaining, it actually doesn't explain it at all. So this is the program we were using the other day, which basically counts down from 3 to 0. And so just to demonstrate that, 3, 2, 1, 0. So it does that by basically printing the number, which is 3, and then it's going to call itself with one number less than that over and over again. It's going to call itself, it's going to come up here, it's going to print 2, call itself, it's going to print 1, it's going to call itself, this is going to be 0, it's going to print 0, but then this is going to become false because n is equal to 0 and 0 is not greater than 0. So this will be skipped over and we're going to start returning here. But once it returns, it's going to return up here. And then it's going to execute below that. And since there's nothing else below that, it's just going to keep returning. Now, the important part of this to understand is that every time this function is called, the variables that are within each of these function calls are stored in something called a stack. And so for the first function call, n is going to be equal to 3. For the second function call, n is going to be equal to 2. N is going to be equal to 1, and so on. And this is never lost. And so each one of these function calls is called a stack frame. So the reason why this was confusing is because when we put the print statement down here, this kind of changes it, because this print statement is never executed until the functions start to return. So when n is equal to 3, it's going to call itself. And then n is equal to 2, it's going to call itself. N is equal to 1, it's going to call itself. And then n is equal to 0, that's represented by this last function call here. N is equal to 0. So this is not going to execute. It's going to go all the way down here and just simply return to the it returns here. It's going to return to the previous function call. And then this part here is going to be erased from the stack. And when we return to that previous call, that is when n is going to be equal to 1. And that's when it's going to execute the print statement below it. So that's why it's going to print n is equal to 1. It's going to come back down here. There's nothing else to execute. It's going to return. It's going to come up here. And then n is going to be equal to 2 in this function call. So it's going to print 2. It's going to return again. And then n is going to be equal to 3 on the last one. So it's going to print it in reverse order, in other words. So 1, 2, 3. There we go. Anyway, I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, leave a comment. But in order to understand recursion, in my opinion, you have to understand the stack and how this looks. And you can even write it out on paper. So each time the function is called, it stacks up. So this is the first function call. This is the second one, third one, fourth one. And as it's returning here, returning, each of these are going to be removed one at a time. But these variables are never lost. That's the important thing to understand. Anyway, I hope that makes sense. That's all I got. Peace.